O Aldmeris, old Elnafay, your loving visage haunts us yet, your Zephyr's kiss enthralls us still, though only in heart's memory, and sorrow to the marrow deep infuses every Aldmeri. The Isles of Somerset and Auradon are home to some of Tamriel's most wondrous landscapes, a province of exquisite beauty, a beauty that is mirrored by its inhabitants, and even its architecture. Here the pastures shimmer like fields of emerald in the sun, and cherry blossoms fleck the hills, shedding petals which fill the air with saccharine aroma. But to the High Elves, not even the abundance of verdant meadows and vibrant forests can pierce the shadow cast by the land that was lost. In many ways, the grandeur of their cities and megastructures are a testament to this. Some say the capital city of Alinor is a city made from glass or insect wings, a hypnotic swirl of ramparts and impossibly high towers, which catch the light and refract it, displaying the full spectrum of colours across the bustling streets. Ostentation flourishes unchecked in Somerset, and that no doubt stems from an obsession with the past, with the race's shared memories and ancestry. They were once gods, or so their creation myths would have you believe, and it wouldn't be unreasonable to speculate that they build such ornate obelisks and showy spires in some vain aspiration to reach the heavens once more. But if the Somerset Isles are so picturesque, then this mysterious land the elves long to return to must be the most glorious land in the universe. They call it Aldmeris, or Old Elnafay, and beyond the murky reminiscences of the elves, we know next to nothing about it. When a great crisis struck the continent, the Aldmer elves were forced to leave, and not a day has passed since that they haven't thought about returning. But what actually happened to Aldmeris? How has no one managed to find it since? And did it ever really exist in the first place? Hey guys, I'm Drew from FudgeMuppet, and in today's video we're going to get to the bottom of the Elven Homeland. The Altmer won't stop going on about it. They could conquer all of Tamriel, and they'd still be whining about how much nicer Aldmeris was. Innumerable seafarers have vanished in the endless ocean to the south, but we're going to succeed where they've failed, and we will find the answers to these conundrums in the next 15 minutes. So climb aboard, and let's set sail in search of Old Elnafay. Before we had the many diverse races of Mer, there were the Aldmer, the First Folk, the Elder Folk. In the distant Merethic era, the Aldmer were the Proto-Mer, and when they sailed north from Aldmeris, they were far more advanced than Tamriel's natives, be they man or beast. They brought with them their sophisticated literate culture, and quickly displaced the various primitive beast races of Somerset. As far as the Aldmer were concerned, no other races were going to be able to rival their intelligence and cultural development, for they were direct descendants of the gods. Within the limits of Mundus, the Aedra began to lose their divine essence, slowly seeping from them to power the realm. Those not fortunate enough to escape with Magnus transformed themselves into the Elnafay out of necessity. It was the Atada's way to delay their deterioration, and to keep the world they now existed within from dying. Some had to marry and make children just to last. Each generation was weaker than the last one, and soon there were the Aldmer. Through this lens, the Aldmer were adamant that they must uphold the holy honour of their ancestry by creating a civilization worthy of their forebears. Their architecture isn't devoid of practical planning, but it is paramount that their palaces and towers are fit for the gods. The Aldmer strived for perfection, for that was their perceived path back to godhood. Though all we know about their society and architecture comes from their development of Somerset, we actually have no traces of what life was like in Aldmeris. From politics and religion to the environment, wildlife and location, all we have is conjecture. Somerset's Crystal Tower holds ancient texts and faded tapestries, which once translated and examined have yielded only the barest descriptions and sketches of a beautiful but very strange land. Be it sketch or written word, there are no representations of the continent's flora or fauna, only the Aldmer. It almost seems like some vivid dream that isn't fully realised beyond the peripheral vision of the former inhabitants. According to the Pocket Guide, it appears always as an endless city, built upon itself over and over again, until no nature remains at all. The highest towers are reserved for interring the dead, a tradition continued on in the Crystal Tower itself. The best hope of painting a picture of what Aldmeris was comes from observing the Somerset Isles. From architecture to society, it was built by the settling Aldmer people and their ancestors, and no doubt they have maintained or inherited customs and practices from Aldmeris that manifest in their new home. Only something inevitable was unfolding in Somerset that would jeopardise the united vision of the Aldmer, and along with it any hope of truly returning to times past. Over the course of the Merethic era, the Aldmer Aldmer split apart, physically and culturally, and emigrated across Tamriel. At first, the division of the Aldmer was just geographic. The Durrani clan began small, but became a prosperous dynasty in High Rock, ruling over the northwestern province for centuries. The Durrani were not overly impacted by their change of home, and remained very true to the Aldmer ways. There were also the wild Aelid elves of the Heartland. They had their own very distinct civilization, but they preserved the Dawn-era magics and language of the Elnefey. Their language, Aeladun, was very similar to Aldmeris. But other splinter groups of the Aldmer became so divergent that the similarities ended at the mer suffix. The Bosmer Wood Elves, who populated the southwestern jungles of Valenwood, rejected the formal traditions of the Aldmer, and traded them for a simple existence in harmony with nature. The Malmer supposedly separated from the Aldmer before the continent was lost, but the dense mists and kelp jungles of Pyandania hardened the Sea Elves, adapting them to the aquatic ecosystem, making them alien despite their shared longing for the continent of Old Elnefey. And then there's the Chimer. Thanks to the Daedra lords Boethia, Mephala and Azura, the Chimer caused the greatest fracture in Aldmeri culture. The good Daedra taught the Chimer to live in defiance of their mortality, ever seeking to overcome it, rather than wallowing in self-pity for Lorkhan's injustices. They left for Morrowind and became arguably the most divergent of all the elves. They would later deviate further, becoming the Dunmer. Not only had the followers of the Daedra and Prophet Veloth become the Chimer and Dunmer, but the event that led to this exodus created another derivative race of Mer. When Boethia consumed Trinomac, the warrior champion of the Aldmer pantheon, he became Malakath, and his followers, of which he had many, became the Orsimer, the pariah folk. And you need only glimpse into one of their strongholds to see how drastic their cultural and physical differences are to the Aldmer. So why is this so important? We're talking about the Elven ancestral homeland after all. Who cares if the races have changed? Well, there's a case to be made that this paradigm shift is the reason Aldmeris is lost to the elves. The Altmer, and perhaps the remnants of the Durrani, are the closest races to the Aldmer, and in their eyes, this split from a unified race to a variety of unique races resembles another step in their gradual degeneracy from their Aedric ancestors. The further they stray from tradition, the harder it will be to retrace their steps back to Aetherius. This is a big part of why the High Elves are so fond of eugenics. They are meticulous in ensuring that Aldmeri traits and physical features are preserved over the generations. These conservative values may suggest that the Altmer are simply clinging to the past, afraid of change. But what if they're right? What if the severing of the Aldmer race into numerous offshoots is quite literally the reason their homeland is lost? This would make sense, but only if we part with the notion that Aldmeris exists physically as a landmass. Perhaps Aldmeris is purely figurative, not literal. I have reason to believe that Aldmeris, or Old Elnefey, is nothing more than a collection of lucid memories. Memories that burn bright and incandescent in the Elven psyche, refracting beautiful echoes in their subconscious minds, like the sun through their glass towers, of a place that doesn't exist beyond these waking dreams. These memories are composed of the shared Aldmeri experiences, culture, values, and society, and with every new race of Mer abandoning the old to adapt to new surroundings, so too are they abandoning lost Aldmeris. It's a pretty premise, but such a bold claim needs some documented evidence, more than just the fact that no one can seem to find Aldmeris. Well, I've got plenty to share that might convince you, but seeing as I just mentioned it, let's start with the bizarre fact that no one can find the damn place. Not even the best mariners of the Aldmer race's long history. The Altmer of Somerset are renowned for their naval prowess, largely due to the constant threat of Malmer or Slode ravaging the coasts of the Isles. Despite this, Aldmeris remains uncharted. The story of Topal the Pilot is a perfect example. This legendary explorer and poet was the Mer responsible for charting Tamriel, paving the way for all the Tamrielic cartographers to follow. Topal was not initially tasked with locating Tamriel, but rather Aldmeris. There were 3 ships, the best in the Aldmeri navy, manned by the best Aldmeri sailors. The Aldmer had fascinating devices that made them expert navigators. Father of the Niben, the translation and interpretation of Topal's journal, elaborates on them. It says, for centuries, strange crystalline balls were unearthed at the sites of ancient Aldmeri shipwrecks and docks, peculiar artifacts of the Malefic and Dawn eras, that puzzled archaeologists, until it was demonstrated that each had a tendency to rotate on its axis in a specific direction. There were 3 varieties, one that pointed southward, one that pointed northeast and one that pointed northwest. With these compass-like contraptions, the Aldmer theorized that they could surely rediscover Aldmeris. A ship with a name not mentioned in the fragment took his vessel northwest, towards Thras and Yakuda. The second ship, the Pasquiniel, manned by pilot Ilio, took the southern waystone and must have sailed down towards Pyandania. Topol, in his ship the Niben, took the northeast waystone and found the mainland of Tamriel. The fact that all three ships headed in such different directions goes to show just how clueless the Aldmer were as to where they came from. We're supposed to believe that they'd been caught in torrential rains and tempestuous winds when they washed up on the shores of Somerset. But how could such gifted seafarers be so disoriented? Father of the Niben goes on to say, naturally, only one of the ships returned, and we do not know if either or both of the other two found Old Elnathay, or perished at sea, or at the hands of the ancient Pyandanians, Slode, or Yakudans. But if one ship did find Aldmeris, surely they would have returned for the rest of their people waiting in Somerset. With their waystone, they could easily retrace the route of their voyage. The Pocket Guide to the Empire also says, for countless centuries, adventurers have sought lost Aldmeris, only to return disappointed, if they return at all. We've already mentioned the descriptions of Aldmeris. It appears always as an endless city, built upon itself over and over again, until no nature remains at all. It's a city that continuously overwrites itself, but that sounds really impractical for a civilization. They build entire cities, wiping out the local flora and fauna in the process, and then proceed to tear it all down and start again. Doesn't this sound more like a worldview than an actual location? As Aldmeri ideals evolve and new technologies and magics are discovered, their beliefs change. The new builds upon the old over and over again. And there's also the fact that no Aldmer documented the native wildlife, nor did any stories get passed down the generations. Dreams rarely make sense when you analyze them with your waking mind. They're self-centered, and the world around you isn't beholden to any laws or logic. It all exists just to serve your conjured experience. Aldmeris is no different. The city is a dream, a metaphor that represents the transformation of the elves over time, since the Dawn Era. And what about the supposed crisis that befell the continent? The fabled sundering of Aldmeris? The Pocket Guide reports on the speculation, stating that some say that Aldmeris was sunk into the sea by the angry gods of the Aldmer, while the creation story told in the annotated Annuad speaks of the Elnathay Wars, elaborating on the sinking of the continent. We mentioned that the elves believe they descended from the Aedra, who became the Elnathay, before eventually becoming the mortal races. Well, there were the Old Elnathay and the Wandering Elnathay. I've gone into detail on these wars and the distinction between the Old and the Wanderers in our most recent Elder Scrolls lore video on the Lunar Forge, but I'll summarize it briefly now. When Anu merged the remnants of the 12 destroyed worlds of creation into one, a large chunk of the Elnathay homeland remained intact on Nirn. This became known as Old Elnathay, and all of the inhabitants of this land also took that name, and they were the ancestors to the elves. But there were many Elnathay who were scattered upon arrival. These were the Wandering Elnathay, the ancestors to men. Eventually, the Wandering Elnathay found the hidden land of the Old Elnathay, and were amazed and joyful to find their kin living amid the splendor of ages past. The Wandering Elnathay expected to be welcomed into the peaceful realm, but the Old Elnathay looked on them as degenerates, fallen from their former glory. War broke out, and the brutal conflict reshaped the face of Nirn, sinking much of the land beneath new oceans, and leaving the lands as we know them, Tamriel, Akavir, Admora, and Yakuda. The Old Elnathay realm, although ruined, became Tamriel. So when we hear mention of the sundering of Aldmeris, in which the angry gods pulled the Old Elnathay homeland beneath the sea, I believe they are referencing this source. Only the Annuad specifically states that Tamriel is Old Elnathay, not Aldmeris. There is no mention whatsoever of a continent named Aldmeris in this creation story. Of course, it does say that the Old Elnathay land was ruined, but it continued to exist as Tamriel. If this is the case, then the Old Elnathay, who would later become the Aldmer, were never homeless. They retained their homeland of Tamriel. So let's reframe the idea that Aldmeris was sunk into the sea by the angry gods of the Aldmer. What if these angry gods were the gods of the Aldmer pantheon, enraged by the gulf widening between the elven races? This is the real sundering of Aldmeris, as without communal ideals, the Aldmer, and by extension Aldmeris, cease to be. The Altmer may cling to the memory of Aldmeris, but now that the elves are so divided, it will remain lost to them. And even if somehow they they did find it, it would only exist in their minds. After the Angry Gods line, the Pocket Guide proceeds to say, others claim that the Elven homeland has left Mundus, and will only return when the races of Myr are united as one, which supports the idea of a sundered culture as opposed to a sundered continent. The final piece of evidence is technically not canon, as the text does not feature in the games, but it was written by Michael Kirkbride, one of the key contributors to the Elder Scrolls universe and its lore. One of his non-canon characters, New Hatter, wrote a series of letters to report about the coming of the Oblivion crisis to the Empire. In the 5th letter, he writes about the Towers of Creation, and the Elven attempts to emulate the Adamantine Tower. The letter states, the Aldmer began construction of their own towers. The fact that they built more than one shows you that they were not of one mind. The Aldmer began to split along cultural lines, on how best to spread creation and their parts in it. Each tower that was built exemplified a separate accordance. This sundering of purpose is the myth of the destruction of Aldmeris. Outside of the dawn, and even then only in the dreamtime of its landscape, there was never a terrestrial homeland of the elves. Old Elnafay is a magical ideal of mixed memories of the dawn. Do not believe the written histories. All mortal life started on the starry heart of dawn's beauty, Tamriel. In their varied unique strategies to overcome the tests of mortality and achieve enlightenment, the elves have become scattered, weakened by their separation. The concept of Aldmeris is one of strength in numbers, but instead of having the Aldmer, we have the Altmer, Kaimer, Dunmer, Dwemer, Falmer, Malmer, Bosmer, Orsimer, Aelids, and to an extent the Dureni and the Bretons. So many aberrant branches and offshoots. This is the sundering of Aldmeris. The lost continent is in truth their lost sense of community and shared identity. Old Elnafay will only return when the races of Myr are united as one. The High Elves strive fervently to keep Aldmeri culture alive, and in doing so they clasp the final fraying threads linking the Myr to their heritage. But they are isolated in this endeavour. The Dureni may also be aiding in this despairing effort, but they are a shadow of their former glory, secluded in the confines of Isle Balfiera. The Aelids, in their own characteristically profane way, also preserved some aspects of the Old Elnafay magics and language, but they have long since fallen from grace. In the present day, almost all hope of restoring Aldmeris has passed, but the Altmer High Elves, under the control of the Falmor and the Aldmeri Dominion, have their secrets and their schemes. They still value tradition, they still believe they are descendants of the gods, and will not stop until they escape mortality and return to Aetherius. Until such a day comes, they will always have the Isles. Though we may pine for old Elnafay, the golden warmth of the Divines will always dry our tears in the sun-kissed land of Somerset. And with that, we come to the conclusion that everything the elves believe in is a lie. They're all hallucinating, and they're all homesick for a place that doesn't exist. The grass is always greener in old Elnafay. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. My name's Drew, this is FudgeMuppet, and I'll see you in the next one.